Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your political circular firing squad update, along with a little coronavirus thrown in just for good measure. Oh my God. I posted a tweet last night. I'm not sure which hurt more. By the way, getting old kind of sucks. I'm doing a little low voltage wiring data network stuff. And this involves sitting on the floor while terminating the jacks that go in the wall in each of the rooms. And I guess I ought to leave the wire a little bit longer. I usually leave about an extra foot at the terminal end. And then, you just stuff that back in a box or in a wall. Or, if you're doing old work, it's a wall ring. If it's new work, you usually have a box. But, about a foot's worth. And then that way, if something goes wrong with the jack and you have to re-terminate it, there's enough there to be able to do it. Anyway, I'm sitting there, of course, cross-legged doing this with my, my punch-down tool, everything. And man, after every single one of these stations, I get up and I do, frick, man, my knees, my ankles. It's not like they hurt like arthritis. It's like they hurt because they're just in one place for too long and there's no motion, and I don't have the range of motion I used to have when I was 20. I used to do those kinds of wiring jobs for money many, many years ago. And in fact, MCS, the first thing we did was data wiring, and it was terminals then. So we were pulling cable in many cases in places where we had to use plenum rated cable because we really had no choice in terms of where the wiring was going, and we were in a commercial environment, so we had to play by all the rules. You get relaxed ones in a residence. Fire stops and things like that in a single family home with two-story residence are typically not required. In commercial installation, they always are. So anyway, I doing this stuff, and and then, man, I made the mistake of turning the debate on. Oh my God, the projective vomiting was not from coronavirus. It was from watching these people clown themselves, and Bloomberg, holy crap, Bloomberg literally blew his own head off on the stage, caught himself saying that he bought his seat. You generally don't recover from those kinds of errors, okay? I mean, that's an unforced error. That was the one that I just kind of sat there. Did I really hear that? Of course, no, I didn't really. Yeah, okay, nice try, Mike. You're done. Have a banana. It's over. Game's up. That's it. We're finished. Hey, oh, Christ. Anyway, I think we need to have a serious conversation in this country about exactly what it is that the Democrats think they're offering, because they don't have anything to offer, and that's the problem. Is what are they trying to sell to the electorate? Okay, and this, if you're trying to out Trump by saying, well, we'll quantitative sleaze our way to success with whatever, you're not going to get there, folks. This entire monetary game that has been going on since 2008 is on life support right now. It literally has a ventilator down its throat and a pacemaker keeping the heart going. The folks at the Federal Reserve, everyone says, oh, they're not political. They're not supposed to be political. Oh, cut the bullshit, folks. These people are more interested in making sure that there's no kind of serious sell-off or crash than anybody else in the history of mankind, and that is never, ever, 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 ever going to change. And they know they're going to get blamed, and so they're going to do everything in their power. Never mind, may I point out that the Federal Reserve's customers, if you will, the people that they're most responsive to, are the banks. So why, not the people? The Federal Reserve does not exist. Can you go get a loan from the Federal Reserve? Well, actually, legally you can, but have they ever done it? No. This is one of the things I pointed out during the crash. It would actually be legal for the Federal Reserve to directly loan you money to go buy a car or a house. That would actually be legal. It's in their charter. They can do this. Okay. Now, it has to be collateralized and yada yada. The only securities they can buy are those guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the federal government. But in exigent circumstances, they can actually make loans to people. But have they ever done it in history of the Fed? No. Why not? Because you're not the client. You're not the customer. The banks are the customers. Banks are the clients, so therefore the banks are who they care about. Nobody else, period. End of discussion. That's it. We're done. Now, would you please stop being stupid? I know. It's hard to stop being stupid. It's easy to be stupid. Not being stupid is difficult. It's very, very difficult. It actually is one of those things that most people just can't get their arms around. But you need to stop being stupid. Okay. Big winners and losers. I actually thought Bernie took a gut shot. And it was the Cuba thing that got him. That's an own goal, though. He owns that one by his own hands and his own stupidity, and he deserves it. And he got smacked around a little bit, and he didn't like it, and you could see it in his face. And folks, one of the things you have to understand about public appearances like this, debates, is that own goals are your own fault, but generally speaking, there shouldn't be any more. And that's the thing that you should never, you never let somebody capitalize on one by giving them the reaction, because the reaction is worth more than the actual hit. The arguably the best debate moment that we ever had when I was involved in Kaylin Fretz's campaign was in Milton at a kind of town halls-ish sort of thing that turned into a debate between him and Miller, who was the incumbent. And everybody showed up on the, that was contending. But this, by the way, was the only time that Miller actually directly faced Kaylin, okay, in any kind of public event. And I know why, because Kaylin essentially took him out back, bent him over the table, and boffed him up the butt. And what I told him to nail him on, which he did, was the Camp Lejeune fiasco, because we, of course, are in Northwest Florida, very heavily military area and retired military. And the Camp Lejeune fiasco was directly under the Veterans Affairs jurisdiction, which was one of Miller's calling cards. And essentially what happened in Camp Lejeune was that the military, for a very long time, ignored the fact that their fuel tanks were leaking, as well as their blending facilities. And so there was a very ridiculously high amount of benzene that was ending up in the water table and in the drinking water. They didn't tell anybody. And there, as a result, there were a large number of cancers that were clustered around the people who lived there, not just service members, but also the dependents. It was a huge scandal, and Kaylin scored a monstrous hit on him for basically not getting off his ass and doing something. Not only, and it wasn't so much a question of stopping it, because it was it was something that happened in the past. It was that once it came out to light, trying to stonewall and screw around instead of just taking care of everybody who got hurt. All right, you take care of it. Listen, you're not responsible for the things that the people before you did, but you are responsible for how you deal with it when it comes out. And that was, but this was the same sort of thing with the Bernie Sanders thing with Cuba, is that, he made the comment. Okay, well, guess what? And then he tried to defend it, and he got booed. And it was just, but the reality is that, and this is the problem with politics, okay? You can have, as a candidate, a somewhat nuanced position on certain things. The problem is, you have to be very careful, because we live in a soundbite world. And this is one of the first things I learned when I started doing media stuff. When I started, I'd show up for a media confab thing where they'd have me on television, whatever have you. One of the things I was told very, very early on in my career, long before I started running MCS as an independent company and doing internet service, is that any time that you show up in these things, you must be able to think on your feet, and you must recognize that anything that you say, if someone can take 4 words in sequence out of what you said and run that and make you look like crap, they'll do it. And so you have to be prepared for that to happen, and you have to be prepared to respond to it, and you just must not make that mistake. And that means you have to be able to think on your feet, and Bernie lost there. Biden can't do it at all. He's... Oh my God, 150 million people killed by guns in the last 10-ish years. Well, I suppose if you count all of the communists that have murdered people, maybe we get there. You realize that if we actually go into that area, we start talking about, for example, Rwanda and the record of gun control with Rwanda. Even, I don't know, you couldn't get to 150 million anyway. But if you start talking about the record of totalitarian regimes of various sorts that and what they've done with gun control, what they start with gun control, and then what they do afterwards. Okay, so first they take the guns, and then they murder everybody. If you start going down that road and you start having that conversation, all the socialists and the communists are going to lose bad. And they know this. And therefore, they get very, very nervous about anybody that brings that sort of thing up because they know what's going to happen. They know they're going to lose badly, and they know they're fucked. And so this is one of those things that you cannot, if you are in that group, you cannot allow this conversation to take place. Period. You just can't. And so they go out of their way and do everything in their power to prevent that conversation from taking place. But that conversation at times needs to take place. We need to have that conversation. That is why we have a Second Amendment, explicitly to prevent that from happening. And we need to be talking about, in the context of criminal justice, okay, why do we have all these murders going on? Okay, where are they coming from? What is the demographic that's producing them? And is this a cultural issue or is this a gun issue? Because it has nothing to do with so-called gun culture, and it has nothing to do with there being AR-15s. It has nothing to do with there being a lot of guns. It has everything to do with what you do with a gun. You know, I can have a gun in my nightstand for 20 years. It'll never shoot anybody. A gun by itself never shoots anything. You ever notice that everyone says, the gun went off? Well, no, the gun didn't go off. Somebody pulled the trigger on the gun. That's like saying the SUV ran over the crowd of people in the marketplace. No, it didn't. The SUV, unless it's a Tesla and it's a self-driving car. And now, then maybe it will. But the SUV ran over no. A human being ran over the person and used an SUV. The human being shot Joe on the street and used a 9mm. And oh, by the way, Joe and the guy who shot him, they were both black. Yeah. Well, you know, unfortunately, that's a majority situation. And the bad news is black people are about 14% of the population. So that's ridiculous overrepresentation. You take the gangs, you take that problem out of the situation. You eliminate it through policy changes, and we don't have 80% of the murders in this country. Okay, all of a sudden, all those gun homicides, they stop. And then we can actually focus on the mental health issues and things related to that, and the mass shootings, for the most part, will stop. Then if you actually get rid of the terrorists because you don't let them into the country in the first place, then that small piece of it, but a significant piece of it, i.e. Pensacola, will stop. And now all of a sudden we have accidents and we have suicides. Well, suicides are something that you're only going to address when people stop having a reason to be suicidal. Some people have a reason to be suicidal, and it's a valid one. Listen, if you're diagnosed with terminal cancer and you decide that you're not going to do the slow burn, and you're going to take yourself out in a woods somewhere and take care of business, I'm sorry, I cannot tell you that is a decision you should not have the right to make, and you shouldn't have the tools in order to do it effectively. Because it is not my place to tell you that you have to suffer with that. Now, maybe you happen to be one of those people that thinks that Christianity demands that by God is the only one who can make this. Oh, bullshit. God already made his decision at the point that they tell you have inoperable stage 4 cancer. Anyway. All right, enough of that. Let's talk coronavirus, because on politics, you want the short answer on last night was a circular firing squad. Saturday is going to be very interesting, and so Super Tuesday. I will be doing reporting on both of those. Biden has to win decisively in South Carolina. He has to. If he loses, if he ekes out a win, he stays in the game through Super Tuesday. But if he loses his candidate to Bernie, and he might, his candidacy is over. He won't admit it. And he won't announce it, and he won't withdraw, but he's done. And that's it. So, watch those results very carefully, because Biden is literally betting his political life in terms of getting the nomination on what happens Saturday. So, there you go. All right, coronavirus. Yeah, this is going to be a long one. Why did I know? Okay. South Korea continues to see explosive growth in reported cases. This is an extraordinary situation. But it's going to go on for a while, folks, because we have that church. This is Jesus. This is the problem with cults, right? And large gatherings where people are willing to do it, even though they know there's a high risk. It is a cluster outbreak. It's not widespread, but there's now reportedly a U.S. service person that has contracted it, being transported back to the United States, I assume, and is going to be treated here. We have a cluster in Italy, and we have God knows what's going on in Iran. But I'll tell you what, Iran probably seeds the rest of the terrorist folks, because Iran is interchanging with all of those guys over there who like to blow each other up. And that could, frankly, if it happens, it couldn't happen to a nicer bunch of people. The problem is all the crazy terrorists are pretty young, and they tend to be male, and most of them probably don't smoke. And so my guess is that the fatality rate among the crazy terrorists is likely to be quite low. In other words, most of them are going to get a flu, maybe even subclinically, not go to the doctor. Nobody's going to know that they had it, but they had it. On the other hand, the mullahs and all the graybeards, those are all older people, and they tend to be more susceptible to the effects of this thing. And one of their ministers got it and obviously was meeting with all of the mullahs and all the other, spiritual and political leaders, and therefore it has to be assumed that he gave it to all of them. Now, we'll see how many of those people show up and start dropping like flies, and then whether or not they say, oh, well, it was Allah's will. Well, actually, maybe it was Allah's will. Maybe you were just so stupid that you allowed this thing to spread through your people and kill all of your leadership, which, by the way, if it happens, would be an amazing demonstration that God is good, and we're not talking about the one that thinks that you ought to strap on a suicide vest and blow yourself up. This kind of insanity should not shock coming out of the Middle East or the Middle Sleazed. But there you go. For those of you that think that the United States is going to completely ignore this, well, you know what, the CDC threw cold water on that yesterday, and with good cause. I want to make one comment here regarding markets and things like this. We've seen, of course, a hell of a sell-off in the last couple of days between the Dow and the S&P and everything else. But please do realize, folks, that that in terms of the magnitude of this move, it's not very big. And I'd really like to, from an economics perspective, there's a few things that I think are quite interesting. One of them is that I've been looking at some of the charts in the last few days, and part of the problem is that on a weekly, if you look at the weekly in the S&P 500, the weekly has been susceptible to this kind of a break sort of move for quite a long time. In fact, going all the way back to the beginning of the year. The problem is that if you actually sat out, or God forbid, you shorted at the beginning of the year, seeing this susceptibility, you got run over like a train, and you probably got shaken out of that position. There was the false start that we got, right around the end of January when we saw that little dip, and a lot of people, and then of course the market comes roaring back, only to take a big header in the last couple of weeks. And so, and especially in the last 4 or 5 days. The big problem with this is that if you look at the crossovers and stuff and where these breaks come from, you could say Friday was kind of a warning. The problem is that on a technical basis, it didn't give you any warning. So there's a real issue here when you go back and you look at what used to be very reliable technical indicators, and what you're seeing in the market is that they don't work anymore. And the reason they don't work is because we've got the Fed running around throwing money into the repo market, which is, since I can't find it in bank reserves, I have to assume it's immediately going into stocks. Now, as far as I know, they're still doing this. All right. And part of the problem is that they're lying about it. And so, we've got the usual kind of bullshit that comes out of the political and the central banker class. But in addition to the usual bullshit, we have some unusual and very rude bullshit that's coming out of these guys that makes my skin crawl, and it has to do with situations like this when you get things like the coronavirus. This is not going to go away, all right? But the real impact in the economy, folks, is not coming from this. Okay, it's not this short-term fear, because the truth is that if you want to look at the reality of it, during the time that we've been screaming about a couple thousand dead people because of coronavirus, we had about 10,000 people die in the United States from seasonal flu. Now, they were mostly old and immune compromised, and they died from the pneumonia, but the flu killed them. We can't even calibrate that against, think about this. In China, you have 3 times the population. It's one of the things I said at the very beginning of this. What scares people and causes a great deal of concern is that among certain subgroups, especially the elderly, this particular virus appears to be extraordinarily lethal. And there is a small number of people that when they get it, if they get a sufficiently large viral load, get directly attacked instead of from secondary infections. And it's killing them directly through acute respiratory trouble. There have been people talking about on my forum and elsewhere about preparations and things like pulse oximeters and stuff like this. Folks, you need to understand something about pulse ox. I know how they work. When my father was on his last legs, they had one of those little clip-on things that that he had on. That was and that's a very common thing. Just check, because when you really start to get into trouble, really bad trouble, that thing will tell you that you're pretty much you're close to being done. The problem is that your body's regulatory systems, assuming that you don't have COPD. Now, if you have chronic lung disease, then the whole game is different, and you've got a whole different set of criteria, and everything I'm talking about here doesn't really matter much. But the problem is that your body normally can maintain a high 90s saturation rate, even through serious illness, even through serious compromise. If it doesn't, if you without COPD and such, if your blood oxygenation gets below about 90%, there is a very real risk that within a matter of hours it will fall low enough to kill you. All right, and that's just, folks, this is the nature of all self-regulatory systems in the body. This is one of the reasons that trying to use gross measures like that as diagnostic tools as a layperson is very dangerous, because for example, your blood sugar normally stays within a very narrow range. All right, when you're diabetic, all of a sudden not so much. The problem is that out of range conditions in most of the things in your body, when they truly go out of range, they don't go out of range a little bit, they go out of range very rapidly, because you have balancing mechanisms, buffering mechanisms within your normal body systems that regulate that. And if those fail, they have already been under stress in the direction that they fail, usually for an extraordinarily long period of time. A lot of damage has been accrued. And so at the point that failure to regulate occurs and you go out of range, you're in a lot of trouble. If this thing comes here into the United States, and it will, we will get spot outbreaks. And in fact, San Francisco just declared a state of emergency. Gee, I wonder why. Would that have something to do with all those homeless people shitting all over the street when we know this thing spread fecally? There's still the vector path is being admitted now, but nobody is making hay about it and making a big deal about that being the primary means by which Jesus, how stupid can you be? All right. Yes, this is the primary means by which this kind of stuff's going on, folks. And if you don't think so, you're wrong. And if you're not careful about it, you're going to be fatally wrong. So watch out for things like that. All right. For that situation, it's a very real problem. Very real problem. It's something to definitely keep in mind here when it comes to this sort of thing. As I said earlier, this is your time to get prepared. All right. The possibility of significant outbreaks in the United States cannot be dismissed. However, the odds of the kind of thing that happened in Wuhan happening here in the United States are very low. Why? Because white man sanitation good. And my hypothesis still holds. I know everybody's got their hair on fire. You know, the supply chain disruption, though, that's a different story. But you know what? This is a political story, and it's one I've been talking about for a decade. It's one that should have hit the markets 10 years ago. It never did. Nobody cared. Nobody gives a wet shit. Well, you know what? If we do not do something about it now, with what we have out there in the world today, knowing what we know today, then we deserve to have our economy ruined, because there is absolutely no reason on God's green earth that a homogeneous supply chain that runs through China or any other nation. And by the way, you want to know why Trump went to India? Because he's trying to supplant China. Okay? Which is just as stupid. All right? The difference is the people over in India really do aspire to be a first world nation. And they're not communist. And it's, small blessings, right? But if you think they've got sanitation problems in China, go outside the major metropolitan, holy crap, literally. Right on the side of the river. Anyway, that's what I got for today, folks. Listen, the coronavirus thing, I know, big sell-off, right? Is this a buying opportunity? No, not yet. I'd be very cautious here. Frankly, I think that if you have enjoyed the crazy run-up over the last 4 or 5 months, and rah, Trump, think carefully as we get this little bounce here like we got today. Dow up 150 as I record this. What are you going to do if we end up with 50% of the supply chain that feeds our industrial and our pharmaceutical and medical complex knocked offline for an extended period of time? Do you think the Chinese are going to tell the truth about that? Do you think that look at one thing. Look at container ships coming out of Chinese ports. Just look at those numbers, all right? And then tell me where the sourcing is going to come from, how we're going to pick that piece up, and why it is that we were so stupid and cheered so loud about putting it there in the first place. Because you know what? If you want to know who's responsible for all of that and all the rah and all that, and incidentally, I'd say get up, look in the mirror, but I'm going to add another thing to it. All right. The CDC and everything and all of the other things that they're doing right now in the United States are not geared towards keeping people from getting coronavirus. They're not. They're geared at slowing it down. Because if we have even large cluster outbreaks like what happened in South Korea, we have one incident like that, you're going to find out real fast exactly how many negative pressure isolation rooms we have in the United States. And the answer is very few. Not enough. And the first and foremost goal right now of the authorities is not to stop the spread of the virus. The way to do that was to clamp the border shut as soon as this thing started over in China, which Trump did not do. If he was going to be the hero in this thing and do the right thing, that was the right thing to do at the moment that it was first detected. You slam the border closed, and you only selectively reopen it when you have established that each nation for which you reopen it has taken effective steps to make sure that it doesn't get into their country from the source, which, by the way, number very few. That would have had an instantaneous economic impact, and a serious one, which, of course, he won't do because he loves the stock market. So the stock market is why he left the border open and why he continues to, with the exception of Chinese nationals, leave it open today. The problem is Chinese nationals go other places. Where do you think all the fentanyl goes? You don't think this stuff's in Mexico right now? Yes, it is. The whole point of what the CDC is doing and what everyone is doing in the United States right now at the government level is not to stop the virus. It is to stop the rapid evolution of cases. We get 1 or 2 at a time, we can handle those. We get 50 at a time, we might be able to handle those. If we get a South Korea-style outbreak, there are not enough negative pressure rooms in the United States to handle that. In a given area, there are very few places where we could house even 100 people who need negative pressure isolation at one time. And if we had thousands that needed it, forget it. The facilities in the U.S. do not exist. You'd be forced into a sanitarium type model like we had for TB. That is where the potential for panic comes from, because when you go to the hospital and you can't get in, there's a line out the door, and they have no negative pressure facilities, and they can't put you in there. And if they put you in a regular room where they let you stand around, you infect the entire damn place. That's when it hits the fan from a confidence point of view. That's all they're trying to prevent right now, folks. You need to get your arms around this. And if you start to see evidence of small cluster breakouts in your area, you need to be prepared to walk into your house, slam the door closed, and bolt it. And anybody that tries to come through gets shot. I hate to say that, but this is what we've got, folks. We've got a government that is more inclined to just, look, it's all about tamping down panic. That's all it is. And that's okay because, look, panic's bad. Nobody makes good decisions when they're panicking. But that's where we are. I'm your ticker guy. Have a good day.